I thought about the stories I'd heard from others, stories of sleepwalking, night terrors, lucid dreams, and insomnia. I realized that sleep is a frontier, a place where the conscious and unconscious meet, where the mind can wander freely. It's a place of mystery, of danger, of possibility. And when you're deprived of it, you're forced to confront the parts of yourself that you usually keep hidden. In the end, staying awake for 72 hours was more than just a physical challenge. It was a journey into the unknown, a test of endurance, a lesson in humility. It showed me the limits of my own strength, but also the resilience of the human mind. It taught me to respect my own needs, to listen to my body, to care for myself in ways I hadn't before. If there's one thing I learned from staying awake for 72 hours, it's that the mind is both incredibly strong and incredibly fragile. We like to think of ourselves as being in control, as masters of our own thoughts and actions. But when you strip away sleep, you realize just how much of that control is an illusion. The mind is a delicate balance of chemicals, routines, and rhythms. Disrupt that balance, and you start to see cracks in the foundation, cracks that can widen into chasms if you're not careful. I found myself thinking about all the times I'd pushed through exhaustion in the past, late nights studying for exams, working overtime, staying up with friends until sunrise. I'd always thought of those moments as badges of honor, proof of my determination. But now, I saw them differently. I realized that every hour of lost sleep is a debt that must be repaid, one way or another. The body keeps score, and the mind remembers. The struggle to find balance, to protect the mind and body from the toll of sleeplessness. I realized that sleep deprivation is a silent epidemic, one that affects millions of people in ways both big and small. If you're listening to this and you're struggling with sleep, know that you're not alone. It's easy to feel isolated, to think that no one else understands what you're going through. But there's a whole community of people who've been there, who know what it's like to stare at the ceiling at 3 a.m., desperate for rest. There's no shame in asking for help, in seeking support, in making sleep a priority. Your mind and body will thank you. Looking back, I don't regret my experiment. It was difficult, even frightening at times, but it taught me things I couldn't have learned any other way. It showed me the importance of self-care, the value of routine, the necessity of rest. It reminded me that we're all human, all vulnerable, all in need of kindness, especially from ourselves. I also realized that there's a kind of strength in vulnerability. Admitting that you need sleep, that you can't do it all, that you have limits, it's not a weakness. It's a sign of wisdom, of maturity, of self-respect. We live in a world that glorifies hustle, that celebrates those who push themselves to the brink. But real strength comes from knowing when to stop, when to rest, when to take care of yourself. As I bring this story to a close, I want to leave you with one final thought. Sleep is not just a biological necessity, it's a gift. It's a time for healing, for dreaming, for reconnecting with yourself. Don't take it for granted. Protect it, cherish it, make it a priority. Your mind is a remarkable thing, capable of incredible feats, but it needs rest to thrive. So tonight, when you lay your head down, take a moment to appreciate the miracle of sleep. Let yourself drift, let your mind wander, let your body heal. You've earned it. And if you ever find yourself tempted to push past your limits, to see how far you can go without rest, remember my story. Remember the darkness, the confusion, the strange beauty of those sleepless hours. And remember that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply close your eyes and let go. Thank you for listening to my journey. If you've ever experienced sleep deprivation, or if you have your own story to share, I'd love to hear from you. We're all in this together, navigating the mysteries of the mind, searching for balance, striving for peace. Take care of yourself, and good night. There's a kind of vulnerability that comes with sleep deprivation, a rawness that strips away your defenses. You become more honest, more open, more aware of your own limitations. I found myself reflecting on things I'd avoided thinking about, old regrets, unresolved conflicts, dreams I'd let slip away. In the quiet hours of the night, with nothing to distract me, those thoughts rose to the surface, demanding to be acknowledged. It was uncomfortable, even painful at times, but it was also cathartic. I realized that sometimes we need to face ourselves in the dark to truly understand who we are. I also discovered a new appreciation for the simple things: sunlight streaming through the window, the taste of fresh coffee, the sound of rain against the glass. When you're sleep deprived, the world becomes sharper, more intense. Every sensation is magnified, every emotion heightened. It's both a blessing and a curse. I found beauty in the smallest details, but I also felt the weight of every worry, every fear. It was as if my mind had been stripped bare, leaving me exposed to the world. One of the most surprising things was how quickly the mind can recover. After a few nights of good sleep, I felt almost normal again. The fog lifted, the anxiety faded, and my thoughts became clear and focused. But there was a lingering sense of caution, a reminder of how easily things could unravel. I knew that I'd been lucky, that I hadn't pushed myself too far. I wondered what might have happened if I'd kept going, if I'd ignored the warning signs. It was a sobering thought. I started to talk more openly about my experience, sharing it with friends, family, and even strangers online. I was surprised by how many people could relate. People who'd struggled with insomnia, who'd worked night shifts, who'd cared for newborns or sick loved ones. Their stories echoed my own, each one unique but connected by a common thread. I also noticed that my relationships changed, even in subtle ways. During the experiment, I'd withdrawn from friends and family, too tired and distracted to engage. Afterward, I found myself reaching out more, craving connection, wanting to share what I'd been through. I realized that sleep isn't just about rest, it's about connection. It's about being present, being able to listen, to care, to love. Without it, everything feels distant, muted, less real. There was a moment, a few days after I'd recovered, when I caught myself staring out the window at the night sky. The stars looked sharper, the air felt cooler, the world seemed quieter. I felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for sleep, but for the ability to experience the world fully, to be awake in the truest sense. I realized that the experiment had changed me, not in a dramatic way, but in small, lasting ways. I was more aware, more appreciative, more present. But there was also a lingering sense of vulnerability. I knew now how easy it was to lose control, to slip into a state where reality and imagination blur. I knew how fragile the mind can be, how quickly it can unravel. I promised myself that I would never take sleep for granted again, that I would protect it as fiercely as I could. I started to wonder about the deeper reasons why I'd done the experiment in the first place. Was it just curiosity, or was I searching for something more? Was I trying to prove something to myself, to test my limits, to see how far I could go? Or was I trying to escape something, to lose myself in the fog of exhaustion? I didn't have an answer, but I knew that the experience had given me a new perspective on my own mind, my own life. I also thought about the people who live with chronic sleep deprivation, not by choice, but by circumstance. The insomniacs, the new parents, the shift workers, the people with anxiety or trauma that keeps them awake at night. I felt a new sense of empathy for them, a deeper understanding of what they go through. It's not just about being tired. It's about feeling disconnected, vulnerable, exposed. It's about living on the edge of reality, never quite sure what's real and what's imagined. I started to pay more attention to my own sleep habits. I set a regular bedtime, turned off screens an hour before bed, made my bedroom a sanctuary. I treated sleep as something sacred, something to be protected. I noticed that when I slept well, everything else in my life improved: my mood, my focus, my relationships. I realized that sleep isn't a luxury, it's a foundation. Looking back, I'm glad I did the experiment, even though it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. It taught me things I couldn't have learned any other way. It showed me the limits of my own mind, the places I could go when I pushed myself too far. It gave me a new respect for the power of sleep, and a new appreciation for the simple, everyday miracle of closing my eyes and drifting off. I also thought about the contrast between my experience and the lives of people who are forced to stay awake, not by choice, but by necessity. I remembered reading about medical residents, truck drivers, soldiers, and emergency workers who go without sleep for days at a time. For them, sleep deprivation isn't an experiment, it's a reality. I wondered how they coped, how they managed to function, how they kept themselves from falling apart. I felt a new respect for their resilience, but also a deep concern for their well-being. One night, about a week after the experiment, I had dinner with a friend who works night shifts at a hospital. I told her about my experience, and she nodded knowingly. "You start to feel like a different person," she said. "Like you're living in a parallel world. Everything is a little bit off, a little bit surreal." She told me about the mistakes she'd made on the job, the times she'd forgotten important details, the moments when she'd felt like she was dreaming even while awake. "You get used to it," she said, "but you never really get over it." Her words stuck with me. I realized that sleep deprivation isn't just a physical challenge, it's a psychological one. It changes the way you think, the way you feel, the way you see the world. It makes you question your own reality, your own sanity. It's a test of endurance, but also a test of identity. I started to pay more attention to the little things in my life that I'd taken for granted. The feeling of slipping between clean sheets at the end of a long day. The way my mind felt sharp and clear after a good night's sleep. The simple pleasure of dreaming, of letting my mind wander in the safety of sleep. I realized that these things are gifts, not guarantees. They can be taken away, and when they are, you're left with a kind of emptiness that's hard to describe. But it also left me with questions. What if I'd gone further? What if I'd pushed past 72 hours? Would I have lost touch with reality completely? Would I have done something dangerous, something I couldn't take back? I realized that there's a reason our bodies fight so hard to make us sleep. It's not just about rest, it's about survival. I thought about the stories I'd read, the people who'd stayed awake for days, the things they'd seen and felt. I wondered how many of them had come back unchanged, and how many had been altered forever. I wondered if I'd changed, if some part of me had been left behind in those sleepless hours. In the days that followed, I found myself replaying certain moments from the experiment, almost obsessively. There was a strange comfort in remembering the details, the way the light looked at 3 a.m., the odd, echoing silence of my apartment, the feeling of being the only person awake in the world. It was both isolating and oddly liberating. I realized that sleep deprivation strips away the noise of daily life, leaving you alone with your thoughts, your fears, your memories. It's a kind of forced meditation, but one that comes with a price. I started to notice how my perception of time had changed. During those 72 hours, time had lost all meaning. Minutes stretched into hours. Hours collapsed into seconds. I'd look at the clock and be shocked at how little or how much time had passed. It made me think about how much of our lives are structured by sleep, how we measure our days by waking and resting, how we use sleep as a boundary between one day and the next. Without it, everything blurs together, and you start to lose your sense of self. Over the next few days, I noticed the aftereffects of my experiment. My sleep was restless, broken by vivid dreams and sudden awakenings. I felt anxious, jumpy, easily startled by small noises. My appetite was off, and I found it hard to concentrate on anything for more than a few minutes. I felt like I was moving through life in slow motion, watching everything from a distance. It took almost a week before I started to feel like myself again. But even as I recovered, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd experienced. The hallucinations, the paranoia, the emotional swings, they weren't just symptoms of sleep deprivation. They were windows into the mind's hidden depths, glimpses of what lies beneath the surface when the usual barriers are stripped away. I realized that sleep isn't just a physical need, it's a psychological one, a way for the mind to reset, to process, to heal. I started to read more about the science of sleep, about what happens to the brain when we're deprived of it. I learned that during deep sleep, the brain clears out toxins, consolidates memories, and repairs itself. Without sleep, those processes break down. The brain becomes flooded with stress hormones, neural connections weaken, and the boundaries between reality and imagination blur. I realized that my experience wasn't unique. Anyone who pushes themselves to the edge will find the same strange, unsettling territory. But there was something else, too, something I hadn't expected. In the midst of the exhaustion and confusion, I'd found moments of clarity, flashes of insight that I wouldn't have had otherwise. I thought about my life, my choices, the things I'd taken for granted. I realized how much I relied on routine, on the comfort of sleep, on the stability of a well-rested mind. I saw how fragile that stability really was, how easily it could be disrupted. When the clock finally struck the end of the 72nd hour, I let out a long, shaky breath. I had done it. I had pushed my mind and body to their limits, and I had survived. But I knew I would never do it again. The moment I allowed myself to close my eyes, it was as if the world shifted. I expected to fall instantly into sleep, but instead, I hovered in a strange limbo. My mind was racing, replaying the last 3 days in flashes, moments of clarity, waves of confusion, the odd, haunting hallucinations. I lay in bed, eyes closed, but my thoughts wouldn't settle. It was as if my brain, after being forced to run a marathon, didn't know how to stop. I felt my heart pounding, my limbs twitching with leftover adrenaline. I tried to focus on my breathing, to let go, but sleep didn't come easily. It took nearly an hour before I finally drifted off, and when I did, it was like falling into a black hole. There were no dreams, no gentle descent, just a sudden, absolute darkness. I woke up 6 hours later, disoriented and groggy, my mouth dry, my head pounding. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. The room looked unfamiliar, the light too bright, the air too still. I sat up slowly, every muscle aching, my mind still foggy. I checked my phone and saw dozens of messages from friends, all asking if I was okay, if I'd made it, if I'd finally slept. I tried to answer, but my thoughts were slow, my words clumsy. I realized that even after sleeping, I wasn't back to normal. My body felt heavy, my mind sluggish. I shuffled to the kitchen, made coffee, and sat at the table, staring into space. I felt a strange sense of emptiness, as if something had been taken from me. I wondered if this was what it felt like to recover from an illness, weak, vulnerable, uncertain. I tried to write about those moments, to capture them before they disappeared. I feel like I'm standing on the edge of a cliff, I wrote. One wrong step, and I'll fall. But for now, I'm still here. I wondered if anyone else had felt this way, if anyone else had pushed themselves to this point. I thought about the stories I'd read, the people who'd stayed awake for days, the things they'd seen and felt. I wondered if they'd felt as alone as I did. The hours crawled by. I watched the clock, counting down the minutes. Every second felt like an eternity. I tried to distract myself with music, but the songs sounded strange, warped and distorted. I tried to watch a movie, but the plot made no sense. I tried to read, but the words blurred together. I felt trapped in my own mind, unable to escape. I started to think about why I was doing this. Was it just curiosity? Was I trying to prove something to myself? Was I searching for answers, or just trying to feel something different? I didn't know. All I knew was that I couldn't stop now. I was too close to the end. As the final hours approached, I felt a strange sense of calm. It was as if my body had given up, resigned to the fact that sleep wasn't coming. My mind felt empty, quiet, almost peaceful. The hallucinations faded, replaced by a dull ache behind my eyes. I felt detached from everything, floating in a sea of exhaustion. I thought about what I would do when it was over. Would I sleep for a day, a week? Would I dream, or would I just fall into darkness? I wondered if I would remember any of this, or if it would all fade away like a bad dream. I wondered if I would ever feel normal again. The last hour was the longest of my life. I sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the clock. My eyes burned, my head throbbed, my body ached. But I was awake. I had made it. 72 hours without sleep. I felt a strange mix of pride and relief, tinged with a deep, bone-deep exhaustion. Lying. Just 12 more hours, I told myself. I can make it. The final stretch was a blur. I moved through the hours like a ghost, barely aware of my surroundings. I drank water, ate a little, but nothing tasted right. I felt detached from my own body, as if I were watching myself from a distance. I tried to keep busy, but everything felt pointless. I counted down the hours, watching the clock, willing time to move faster. As the hours ticked by, I started to notice something strange happening to my sense of self. It was as if my mind was splitting in two. One part of me was still determined, still clinging to the experiment, but the other part was drifting, untethered, slipping into places I'd never been before. I found myself staring at my own reflection in the bathroom mirror, searching for signs of change. My eyes looked sunken, ringed with dark circles. My skin was pale, almost translucent. I barely recognized myself. I tried to talk to myself out loud, just to hear a human voice. "You're almost there," I whispered. "Just a few more hours." But my voice sounded strange, distant, as if it belonged to someone else. I laughed, but the sound was hollow. I wondered if this was what it felt like to go mad, slowly, quietly, without any warning. The hallucinations grew stronger. I saw shapes moving in the corners of my vision, shadows that seemed to flicker and dance. Once, I thought I saw a figure standing in the doorway, watching me. My heart leapt into my throat, but when I blinked, it was gone. I started to hear things, too, soft whispers, the sound of footsteps in the hallway, the faint echo of music that wasn't playing. I knew it wasn't real, but it felt real. My mind was creating its own reality, filling in the gaps left by exhaustion. I tried to ground myself with routines. I brushed my teeth, washed my face, changed my clothes. But everything felt mechanical, automatic, as if I were following a script written by someone else. I found myself questioning everything. Was I really awake, or was I dreaming? Was this all just a hallucination? I pinched my arm, hard, just to feel something. The pain was sharp, but it faded quickly, leaving me more confused than before. I started to think about sleep in a new way. It wasn't just something I wanted, it was something I needed, something my body was screaming for. I thought about all the times I'd taken sleep for granted, all the nights I'd stayed up late for no reason, all the mornings I'd hit snooze. Now, sleep felt like a distant memory, a luxury I couldn't afford. I wondered how people survived without it, how insomniacs coped, how soldiers and new parents managed to function on so little rest. I remembered reading about the effects of sleep deprivation on the brain, how it impairs judgment, slows reaction time, weakens the immune system, how it can lead to paranoia, depression, even psychosis. I wondered if I was experiencing those things now. I felt paranoid, convinced that something was wrong, that I was being watched. I felt depressed, overwhelmed by a sense of hopelessness. I felt on the edge of something dark and dangerous, a place I didn't want to go. But even in the midst of all that, there were moments of clarity. Brief flashes where I felt completely present, completely alive. I noticed the way the light shifted in the room, the way the air felt cool against my skin. I listened to the sound of my own breathing, slow and steady. I realized that I was still here, still holding on, even as everything else slipped away. I started to notice that my emotions were all over the place. One moment, I was laughing at a joke I saw online. The next, I was on the verge of tears. Everything felt amplified, raw, as if my nerves were exposed. I found myself thinking about things I hadn't thought about in years, old memories, regrets, fears. It was as if the barriers in my mind had crumbled and everything was spilling out at once. Around noon, I tried to go for a walk, hoping the fresh air would help. The world outside felt unreal, dreamlike. Colors seemed too bright, sounds too loud. I felt like I was moving through a painting, everything slightly off. I passed people on the street, but their faces blurred, and I couldn't focus on their features. I felt invisible, disconnected from everything around me. When I got home, I tried to read, but the words danced on the page. I tried to watch TV, but the plot made no sense. I tried to write, but my thoughts wouldn't cooperate. I started to feel a deep sense of frustration, a helplessness I couldn't shake. I wanted to sleep more than anything, but I was determined to see this through. I reminded myself that I was doing this for a reason, that I wanted to understand what happens when you push your mind to its limits. By hour 60, I was barely functioning. My speech was slurred, my movements clumsy. I kept forgetting what I was doing, losing track of time. I found myself standing in the middle of a room, unable to remember why I'd gone there. I started to worry that I was doing real damage to myself, that I might not recover from this. But I pushed the thought aside, focusing on the finish line. Just 12 more hours, I told myself. I can make it. I tried to ground myself in reality. I counted objects in the room, recited the alphabet backward, anything to keep my mind anchored. But the line between what was real and what was imagined grew thinner with every hour. I started to feel a creeping sense of dread, as if something terrible was about to happen. I checked my phone, looking for messages, but the screen seemed to swim before my eyes. I called a friend, just to hear another voice, but I struggled to keep up with the conversation. I kept forgetting what I was saying, losing my train of thought mid-sentence. By hour 48, I was a mess. My body ached in ways I didn't know were possible. My head throbbed, my eyes burned, and my hands shook. I felt cold, even though the apartment was warm. I wrapped myself in a blanket, shivering, and tried to distract myself with music. But every song sounded strange, distorted, as if it were being played underwater. I started to cry, for no reason I could name. The tears came suddenly, overwhelming me, and I sat on the floor, sobbing into my hands. I felt completely alone, cut off from the world by a wall of exhaustion. But even in that moment, a small part of me was fascinated. I was watching myself unravel, piece by piece, and I couldn't look away. I wrote in my notebook, describing the feeling as best I could. It's like being trapped in a fog. I know I'm here, but everything is distant, muffled. I can't trust my own senses. I can't trust my own mind. I wondered how much further I could go before something broke. The third day dawned gray and cold. I watched the sun rise, feeling detached, as if I were watching someone else's life. My thoughts were slow, sticky, hard to hold on to. I tried to make breakfast, but I burned the toast and dropped a glass, shattering it on the kitchen floor. I stared at the shards for a long time, unable to process what had happened. It took me several minutes to clean it up, moving in slow motion. By the end of the second day, I was exhausted. My body screamed for sleep, but my mind was buzzing. I felt like I was on the edge of something, teetering between reality and a dream. I wondered how much longer I could keep this up. I wondered what would happen next. The night of the second day was the hardest yet. I sat in my living room, lights on, TV playing quietly in the background, but I couldn't focus on anything. My mind felt like it was wrapped in cotton, muffled and slow. I tried to write in my notebook, but the words came out jumbled, sentences trailing off into nothing. I found myself rereading the same line over and over, unable to remember what I'd just written. It was as if my brain was short-circuiting, refusing to cooperate. Around 2 a.m., I started to feel waves of nausea. My stomach churned, and I had to sit very still to keep from getting sick. I sipped water, hoping it would help, but the feeling lingered. I realized that my body was starting to rebel, sending me every signal it could to force me to sleep. My eyelids felt impossibly heavy, and every time I blinked, it took a conscious effort to open my eyes again. I paced the apartment, desperate to stay awake, but my legs felt like lead. That's when the hallucinations started. At first, they were small, shapes shifting in the shadows, a flicker of movement where there was none. But as the hours dragged on, they became more vivid. I saw a cat dart across the hallway, even though I don't own a cat. I heard someone whisper my name from the kitchen, but when I turned, the room was empty. My heart pounded in my chest, and I had to remind myself, over and over, that it wasn't real. It was just my mind, deprived of rest, conjuring things out of thin air. I tried to read, but the words blurred together. I wrote in my notebook, but my handwriting was shaky. By hour 24, I was officially sleep-deprived. My thoughts were scattered, and I found it hard to focus on anything for more than a few minutes. I tried to watch a movie, but I couldn't follow the plot. I tried to have a conversation with a friend over the phone, but I kept losing track of what we were talking about. I laughed at things that weren't funny, and I felt like I was floating just above my own body, watching myself from a distance. The second day was harder, much harder. My body ached, my head throbbed, and my eyes burned. I started to see things out of the corner of my eye, shadows that weren't there, flashes of movement that disappeared when I turned my head. I knew it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but it was unsettling. I started to feel anxious, like something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I checked the locks on my doors, made sure the windows were closed, and turned on all the lights. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like the world was closing in on me. I tried to distract myself with chores, laundry, dishes, cleaning out the fridge. But everything felt harder than it should have. I dropped things, forgot what I was doing, and had to start over more than once. I found myself staring into space, lost in thought, only to snap back and realize that 20 minutes had passed. Time started to lose its meaning. Hours stretched and contracted, and I couldn't remember what I'd done 5 minutes ago. The first 12 hours were easy. I felt normal, maybe even a little excited. There's something about starting a challenge that gives you a burst of energy, a sense of purpose. I went about my day as usual: work, errands, dinner with friends. I told them what I was doing, and they laughed, made bets about when I'd crash, and offered to check in on me. I felt a little like a science experiment, but I was determined. Midnight came and went, and I was still wide awake. By hour 16, I started to feel the first real effects. My eyes felt dry, and my thoughts began to slow down. It wasn't dramatic, just a subtle sense that I was moving through water instead of air. I noticed that I was more irritable than usual. Little things annoyed me: my phone buzzing, the hum of the refrigerator, the way my chair creaked when I shifted. I wrote it all down in my notebook, trying to be as honest as possible. I wanted to capture not just the big changes, but the small ones, too. At hour 20, I hit my first wall. My body wanted to sleep. I could feel it in my bones, a heaviness that settled over me like a blanket. I paced around my apartment, splashed cold water on my face, did jumping jacks in the living room. Anything to keep myself moving. I started to question why I was doing this. Was it worth it? Was I just being stubborn? But I pushed through. I reminded myself that this was the point, to see what would happen when I didn't give in. The night dragged on. I watched the sun rise through my window, the sky turning from black to gray to pale blue. There's something surreal about being awake when the world is asleep. It's like you're the only person left, a ghost haunting your own life. I felt both powerful and invisible, like I was seeing the world from a different angle. I made breakfast, even though I wasn't hungry. I've always been fascinated by the limits of the human mind. Not just the things we can achieve when we push ourselves, but the strange, shadowy places our thoughts go when we're deprived of the things we need most. Sleep, for example. We all know we need it. We all know what it feels like to be tired, to drag ourselves through a day after a restless night. But what happens when you push past that? What happens when you deliberately keep yourself awake? Not for a night, not for 2, but for 3 days straight. That's what I set out to discover. I wanted to know, not just in theory, but in practice, what really happens to your mind when you stay awake for 72 hours. Before I started, I did my research. I read about the world record holders, the sleep deprivation experiments, the stories of people who'd gone days without rest. Some of them were funny, some were terrifying, and some were just plain bizarre. I learned that the world record for voluntary sleep deprivation is held by Randy Gardner, who stayed awake for 11 days in 1964. He experienced mood swings, memory lapses, hallucinations, and even paranoia. But I wasn't trying to break any records. I just wanted to see what would happen to an ordinary person, me, if I stayed awake for 3 days. I wanted to document every hour, every change, every strange twist my mind would take. I set some ground rules. No caffeine, no stimulants, no cheating with power naps. I wanted this to be as pure as possible. I stocked up on water, healthy snacks, and a notebook to record my thoughts. I told a few friends what I was doing, just in case things got weird. And then, on a Friday morning, I woke up at 7 a.m., took a deep breath, and started the clock.